If you're going to do it, go hard into it, go hardcore, and immerse yourself, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to learn something new, even if it's not going to directly help or impact your flying career. Just always be willing to learn something new.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Hey there, all my aviation friends. Welcome back to another episode of Fly the Transition, where we will explore another journey of aviation career transformation. I am Jim, your host, and today we have an incredible episode lined up for you. Before we dive in, I do want to take a moment and offer a couple of thank yous. First, I want to thank Dan and Christy from the Taking Off podcast for giving Fly the Transition a shout out in one of their most recent episodes. It really does mean a lot. I've had both Dan and Christy on in past episodes, and they're really great people, and it was fun to be listening to their podcast and hear the name of mine as I listen along. So thank you again to both of you for helping to spread the reach about Fly the Transition. I also want to take a second and thank Chris Metcalf, who reached out to me by email after he found the Fly the Transition podcast from listening to that episode with Dan and Christy. He writes, "First off, let me say what an awesome podcast this is. I just heard about it in an episode of In the Hangar. I started off with the one with Brian Turner. I've seen him a little on In the Hangar, but I had no idea that his path so closely mirrored my own. I'm on my third one now, and it sounds like I'm in pretty good company. There are a lot of us looking at this as a second career. It's nice to hear others talking about maybe taking a slower, more calculated approach. For the longest time, I thought I was doing it wrong. I'm currently a single, multi-commercial instrument pilot with about 475 hours. I'm finding that I'm kind of in the same place as Brian was in the interview. It seems that the next steps are a little unclear for me too. Thanks for all you're doing. Looking forward to catching up on all the episodes. Thank you, Chris, for reaching out. I really do appreciate hearing from our listeners and the feedback. And some other really fun news is the launch of the solo episodes that I've been meaning to work on for the last, since I started this podcast, but they're finally starting to come to fruition. I've researched a whole bunch of topics about making a career change later in life, about challenges and frustrations with flight training, as well as the financial side of how to plan for a career change like this in the first place. I also want to explore some other jobs in aviation that aren't necessarily in the cockpit and talk about and expose those just a little bit more so people know what else is out there. So I have about 15 scripts written at this point, and I've recorded several, and I've got some ready to publish. So every Wednesday morning, I'll be dropping bite-sized episodes focused on aviation training, career paths, and everything else in between. They'll be quick, but they'll be packed with value. So if you're looking to get ahead in your training or thinking about making that big switch into aviation, you don't want to miss these episodes. So on to today's guest. I'll be talking with Nick, who is a first officer with the major airlines. Nick's story is inspiring. He comes from a background in metal fabrication and design before making his jump into aviation. He's going to share some critical insight, like the importance of communicating with your partner during this transition, his experience with misinformation as he navigated the switch, and how every flight and every hour in the air is an opportunity for you to learn. So without further ado, let's jump into my interview with Nick. Well, Nick, thanks so much for joining me on the Fly the Transition podcast. I really appreciate you sitting down with me tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's my first time on something like this, so I'm kind of excited for it.
Awesome. Well, I hope that I could do a good job of telling your story and talking a bit about how you got yourself into a career in professional aviation. So I'm really looking forward to it too. So tell me a bit about how you were first exposed to aviation. Was it when you were a kid? Is it something that came out later in life? Or
I did get exposed pretty early on. My grandfather was a private pilot, and he had a old 1946 Taylor craft that he sold. What was it, about, I think, 2 or 3 years after my mom was born.
Okay.
So I never got to see him fly. He never got to fly with me or anything like that. But he would always, tell me stories about his flying experiences prior to him selling his plane. Probably 1997, I think. I took my first airplane ride with him. I was just a little thing, and he bought just kind of a discovery flight kind of thing with me out of the airport that I would actually start to learn and instruct out of years later. But that was kind of my first foray into that, was just his exposure. I never really thought I could do it as a career until later on, well into my adulthood. So.
Okay. Yeah. So you grew up a little bit with it, but it's not like you were at the airport every weekend hanging out with your parents or anything like that. It was just
correct,
kind of through grandpa's stories that you are first exposed.
Yeah. It was just a light dusting of exposure. It wasn't anything too deep.
There you go. So I hear a lot that people just don't, as they're growing up, they don't necessarily even think of being a pilot as a career. It seems like something that like retired military people do. Like you have to be a military pilot to get into it first. Did you have any thoughts like that, or was aviation just not even like a career path that you considered?
I did fall under the conception or misconception rather that you had to be former military or fly in some armed forces just to be a pilot. But then I looked into it a little bit and I was like, this is expensive. So I was there. It's like it's like this may not be for me. I've never been the person to be rolling in money or anything like that. So. It just wasn't up until I was in my early to mid 20s. I didn't even really have any interest in it. It was just more like a novelty. Hey, that's pretty cool kind of thing. So I started taking lessons just because I had a little bit of spare money from a tax refund that I got one year. And it's like, I'm going to do this to try and kind of make my grandfather happy, make him proud, something that maybe we could talk about. And had a little bit of extra cash. So I decided to go up to the airport that I knew was closest to me, that had the best kind of opportunity for flight schools, and took a discovery flight. And I was kind of hooked there and didn't really take it seriously at first, but I knew that I was going to be way too poor my whole life to do this as a career at that point, and
sure,
unless I made some changes. So that's kind of how that started. So
okay. Let's talk a bit about where you did go after like high school. So Aviation wasn't really on the forefront for you. What career path did you take?
So I was very fortunate in high school to get involved in a vocational program.
Okay.
My junior and senior year, I went to a technical school where they had a lot of different directions you could take or pathways. There's some people did culinary, some people did carpentry. I was drawn to welding and fabrication. So I studied that, and I turned out to have a pretty strong knack for it. And in junior and senior year of high school, I was competing with the American Welding Society, with the Boilermakers. And that was just ultimately the path I decided to take. In high school, my first job was as a maintenance technician for a heat treating factory, and that was really cool.
What exactly is that?
So heat treating factories, a lot of the stuff we did was parts for, I think at the time, John Deere was one of our biggest customers, where they would take steel, or I should say metal, like gear parts.
Okay.
And they get them red hot, and they dump them in an oil tank to quench them and case harden them. And they had 3 different furnaces that did 3 different levels of hardening and heat treating and normalizing, annealing, all this stuff like that. And it was a lot to learn. And I was kind of responsible for a lot of the repairs around there, because as you can, I'm sure, imagine, when, things are repeatedly heated up and cooled down rapidly, they tend to break. So I was responsible for fixing a lot of the stuff around there. And these furnaces that I was working on and working with, they were 1.5, 2 stories tall. They were probably 150, almost 200 yards long. They were massive.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely massive furnaces. But, the downside of that is when it's 90 degrees outside in the summer, it's 135 inside in the shop. So,
yeah, I bet it is.
yeah, I lasted about a year there, and I made it to a custom fabrication shop in an area not too far from where I live. And I was there for several years doing custom fabrication work and doing a lot of custom or niche work for smaller and larger customers too.
Was there like design work that you would do, engineering type stuff, or is it just making the widgets, so to speak?
When I was working at the fab shop, I was doing a lot of fitting and welding, and I love doing that kind of work. If for some reason, God forbid, knock on wood, this never happens, but I lose my medical, that's probably the route I'm going to have to go back into, is some sort of fabrication or welding again, just because I liked it and it was good, but I was noticing people around me who were in their mid 40s or 50s who looked like they were in their 60s, pushing 70s. And I didn't really want to, kind of destroy my body that way if I didn't have to.
Sure.
So I got very lucky, and I applied to this place because I was in college for engineering, and I took a couple of CAD classes there. And I got very lucky that a die design shop or a die shop wanted to hire me and kind of train me for that kind of thing. So I was a junior die designer for a couple of years and worked my way up through there in different companies and all that stuff. So that's kind of how I got involved in the whole engineering and design portion. Was I had just taken a couple classes on CAD work, and then I found a company that was able to or willing to take a chance on me, which I'm very thankful for them. Then I started designing and kind of working on the computer side in the office setting instead, and kind of took a complete different turn, or a complete right turn instead of a left turn when it comes to a fabricating and welding career. Decided to get the office job instead with the AC and the heat in the winter. So
yeah. What kind of things are you designing then?
I live in Metro Detroit, and there's a metric boatload of automotive suppliers around here. So we did a lot of things for the auto industries. Mostly, the first place was pretty much a tier 1 supplier to General Motors, which means like General Motors outsourced directly to them. Let's just say, for example, your car's hood, for example. That's an example. It's made out of steel or some sort of metal, and it's stamped. So what I ended up being responsible for, as I guess the position encompasses, is we would determine how that part is supposed to be formed from a flat sheet of steel. A lot of the times they'd come in and on these big rolls of sheet metal, like you see on the backs of trucks.
Sure.
And so they start out as a flat roll of steel, and then you would figure out how that part, the perimeter has to get cut out, and then the holes in there have to get cut out, and then each bend, each line, each bubble in there has to get formed somehow. So you would kind of map out how that's going to happen, and then that would be called your strip. Your strip, that's taken into consideration a lot of other things like material properties and what that specific material is supposed to do. And then after you have that strip approved by both the customer and upper management for your company, then you would basically simulate that part being formed. And after you simulate how that part gets formed, then you design the die around that strip. And the die is, think of it just like a hole punch. That's essentially what it is. You have a lower part and an upper part, and both come together, and they either punch holes or they stamp out something that looks like something. That's essentially what I was designing, was those dies specific to individual parts.
Okay.
That kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So I think that the way that you ended is, I think, how a lot of people probably think of it, like, oh, you just take these two pieces together, you smush it, and ta-da, here's your part. But it sounds like there's a lot more that goes into it than just, here's a couple of forms and ta-da, here's your part.
Yeah, there definitely can be. There's different types of dies, and I was, fortunate enough to see quite a few of them. But I guess, I guess when you were a kid, did you ever play with those things from Play-Doh, where you would like smash the Play-Doh between the clamshell things, and you come out like some giraffe or whatever it is? That's essentially what we're doing, just in a different manner.
Sure.
So there is a lot to think about when it comes to the design process. A lot of these pieces that are on these dies have to be easily manufacturable.
Sure.
Because you got to think about cost and all that too, but they also have to be foolproof. So let's say you have, just for example, let's say you have to cut a straight line, but that straight line is 2 feet long. You don't really have a lot of wiggle room for air on these parts, so they have to hold pretty tight tolerances.
Sure.
So when you're making this 2 foot long cut, it's probably going to be done with pieces of steel that are, I don't know, 10, maybe 8 inches long at a piece, and they have to be next to each other in high precision. So they're machined together. If you looked at them, you probably wouldn't be able to tell that they're multiple pieces together, except for the fact that you're going to have multiple holes in each piece, and those holes can't have the same pattern, because the guys who are out on the shop floor, they shouldn't be able to take one piece and put it in another spot.
Oh, sure.
Because a lot of these tolerances are so tight, and the gaps on these dies, on the upper and lower half of these dies, are only the thickness of the sheet metal you're working with, which is sometimes like just 10th thou. And if they're misaligned, they could blow up the entire die, and they could shoot steel across the shop.
I don't think anyone probably wants that.
No, there have been people who have gotten hurt or killed because of that kind of thing.
Wow.
So, and these dies can be massive too. So,
how big are we talking as far as how big they can get?
I worked on some that were, the total length of the die was probably somewhere around 15 feet long and about 65 inches wide, I think that is. And they probably weighed somewhere around 85,000 pounds. So,
wow.
I'd say it'd be pretty hard to get these things above 100,000 pounds, but they're still pushing a very heavy weight.
So how long were you in that field then?
About 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah. I started there. I was at one company for, 3 years, I think. And then I moved companies, but that company was too far away from my house. I only was there for like 90 days.
Okay.
And then I moved to another company. I was there for another 3.5 years, I think. So.
Were there certain things in that career path that you found to be more rewarding, or?
Actually, yeah, that was a good career path to see kind of something from start to finish, because you started with a blueprint for a part that needs to be made. And then at the end of it, you'd see this die running and producing this part. So you could see this from start to finish be made, and you had, your hands on multiple steps of that process.
Sure.
When you can see the end result of something, and which I think is probably the most rewarding thing about that job in general. And also if it's on a car that you see every day on the road, like, hey, I worked on something on that car.
That's cool.
I'm sure a lot of guys out there or girls whose parents have been in the trades, and like, hey, I worked on that building there. Hey, I did air conditioning for that building over there. So
that's pretty cool.
It's just so. Yeah, it was cool to see something from start to finish and the end result of something completely.
Were there certain things that you saw as like a con within that field?
It was 100% computer work. Okay. So I'd be sitting in front of a computer for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week in a dark room. And I wanted to eat glass almost every day because it was just so miserable sitting in a dark room in front of a computer screen, 10 hours a day. I live in Michigan, like I said earlier, so you get to work when it's dark, you leave work when it's dark in the wintertime. So,
I understand that. At some point in here, did you start working on aviation, or was it more of just a I'm going to make a career change and I want to make aviation in?
When I was working as a die designer, I was still going to school for mechanical engineering. And at that point I was like, I don't really like this industry much. I don't really see the reward of getting a super expensive degree in this field. So plus I don't really like it that much. So I decided to switch gears and say, hey, I kind of want to do this because, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I realized I was going to be way too poor in this industry to do aviation as a hobby. So I figured, hey, might as well have somebody pay me to do the thing that I like to do. So I kind of switched gears and started looking into university programs, and I ended up settling on a university program. I was able to partner with the flight school that I had initially started with. So I finished my private. That took me 2 years because I didn't take it seriously. And I was, a dumbass about it and didn't study, didn't, really take it seriously. I thought, oh, cool, I'm going flying. Yeah.
Right,
cool.
right.
Right. And
tale as old as time, my friend.
Yeah, just, a little too comfortable wasting money and time, especially my instructor's time. But, so once I kind of looked into it and found a college program, I was like, look, it's time to settle down or I guess hunker down and get this stuff done. So I did a 141 program where instrument and commercial I did through a university program, and everything else I did Part 61 just to get it done quicker without the student loans.
Sure.
So
okay.
I have student loans, but I think they're still significantly less than some people have flown without their. Fortunately for me. So then in the beginning of 2020, I lost my job at the die design place. And,
oh, no kidding.
Yeah, that was kind of a shock and a rough time too. I mean, I'm sure the beginning of 2020, everybody was aware of what happened there, but the reason why I lost my job wasn't necessarily due to that, but it was due to downsizing for the most part. And because I had kind of checked out, if I'm being completely honest with you, I didn't really care about the job anymore, and I wasn't the best employee. So that had a pretty big contribution to why I no longer work there either. But that time off between losing my job, the start of COVID, trying to find new employment gave me plenty of time to get my CFI and study for all that. And got my CFI and started instructing in June of 2020. I started instructing and just kind of worked up from there. I will not say that I have a unique aviation experience so far. I pretty much have a very run-of-the-mill experience.
Sure.
So
let me ask you this then. As you lost your job, are you at that point you're like, all right, aviation is the thing, or were you kind of still trying to explore what your options might be?
Oh, at that point, I knew aviation was the thing. It was like a light switch. It was the only thing that really, as cliche as it sounds, it was really the only thing that allowed me to wake up in the morning and look forward to something. Sure. I had a purpose. I had a reason to do stuff. I had an end goal in sight that I wanted to get to. I had aspirations, and that's exactly what it was. So there was no confusion about aviation being the thing for me. So
as you've made that decision, I mean, obviously the financial aspect is a little bit different than if you're like fall into a career and wanted to make a change. The change was made for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what kind of considerations did you have to make at that point as you decided, all right, aviation is the direction I'm going to go?
I had to be real honest with my partner about it. She, she's been with me since the beginning of my training and all that too. Like I met her just a couple months after I started my training before I even took it seriously. And having a good partner really helps out. Those were the kind of considerations I had to think about was, hey, if I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this person, I got to make sure that they're on board with me not having an office job. But really all I can think about for that, other than obviously the commitment, dedicating the time and money to this new career, switching gears completely, starting from scratch.
So you raised an interesting point, though, as you're talking with your partner about this. Obviously, this isn't a 9 to 5. You go to the office and you're sitting in front of a computer. We're talking about probably decent amount of time away from home if you go into, the right kind of aviation. So is that something you guys talked about or considered? Or?
to her credit, she believed a lot of the misinformation I gave her, not because it was malicious,
Right.
but it's because I was ignorant.
Okay.
So yeah, I didn't quite understand how it was really going to be in all honesty when I was first starting this career and getting into it. But I've been fortunate enough so far to make it work as best as I can. Luckily, we don't have any kids or anything like that quite yet, so it's not as detrimental to start a career without kids, and I think it would be with kids. But yeah, I mean, when I was a flight instructor, I was working 6 days a week, but the airport was 35 minutes from my home. It was really no big deal. But once I started working for the regional airline, then it's like, man, I'm gone for 6 days at a time, and then I'm home for 2 if I'm lucky, and then I'm gone for another 6 days. And, you know, that was pretty rough on her for sure. And for me, I was getting homesick, but we miss each other. She missed me, and there was a lot of things at home that she could have used a lot of help with that I obviously couldn't help with because I was gone.
Sure.
But then, you know, I left the regionals, and now I'm at a major, and my quality of life has significantly improved. And now the tables have completely turned where I think in the month of October, I flew a total of 1 hour and 53 minutes.
In October.
In the entire month of October. So I was gone, or I was home 30 days out of 31, I guess I should say 29 days, because it was technically a 2-day trip. So I was home 29 out of 31 days of the entire month of October. So
I got to ask you this. So what kind of misinformation did you fall victim to as you're starting to make these decisions?
Oh, it's not going to be that bad, or I'm not going to be away from home for that long, or, training is going to be tough, but I'll still be able to talk to you every night, that kind of thing. So also the amount of, I mean, when I was still at the regionals, they had increased their pay, but not like what had just recently happened. It was, if we're struggling for money, I'll just pick up another trip. And I didn't realize how exhausted I'd be after a 5-day trip in the first place, and kind of underestimated how much of a toll those kind of things would take on me. And money got tight for a little bit just because, it's just the regionals, and your first year FO at the regionals is never kind of easy for anybody. So it's just paying your dues. Sure. I think everybody, when they start this kind of thing or start a career they're proud of, they kind of oversell it to themselves to kind of convince themselves that it's still worth it for them. And they kind of have to defend their choices with the people that are questioning them. I mean, not that that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing for the most part, but it's just one of those things that you kind of have to think about, that a little bit of brutal honesty would go a long way, especially for somebody looking to get into the industry, and they may not have anybody that has had any experience in the industry that they've had any exposure to prior.
Before we continue with this episode, a quick word from those who help make the Fly the Transition podcast possible. Are you tired of uncomfortable sunglasses in the cockpit? Well, check out Flying Eyes Optics, designed by pilots for pilots. These ultra-lightweight, durable frames fit perfectly under your headset without that painful pressure you experience with cheaper sunglasses. Don't let discomfort distract you from the joy of flying. Visit our affiliate link and use affiliate code FlyingMidwest10 and you will save 10% off your next pair while helping to support the podcast. Elevate your flying experience with Flying Eyes. Thinking of upgrading your headset? Well, Lightspeed Aviation headsets are perfect for transitioning pilots and those in training alike, combining crystal clear audio with industry-leading noise cancellation. Whether you're just starting training or you're already in that full transition to aviation, a Lightspeed headset will give you that edge. Visit our affiliate link down in the show notes, and you too can explore your next go-to headset. If you love the podcast, now you can represent it wherever you go. Check out our Fly the Transition merch store for exclusive designs, including t-shirts, hats, and more, all crafted for the aviation enthusiasts. Get your gear and show the world that you're following your aviation dreams. Head on over to flyingmidwest.com/merch and start repping Fly the Transition today.
You're listening to Fly the Transition. If you've ever thought about changing careers and getting into the aviation industry, welcome to your new home. Now, back to your host, Jim Schilling.
You talked a bit about you went from being a CFI to you going to the regionals. Did you always know you wanted to go to the 121 route, or did you explore other options like corporate stuff? Or
I didn't really know if I wanted to go 121 or 135 or anything like that. I just kind of went with whatever I felt was going to be, I guess, the quicker return on investment and the lifestyle that I really liked. Because with the 121 stuff, you're flying usually bigger airplanes, a little more consistent flying. There's less of the Wild West attitude, I feel like, in the 121 environment than the 135. And I kind of wanted to have something structured, something more professional, because I mean, I was a tradesman. I was super blue collar. So I'm like, okay, a 121 environment is the white collar job that I'm looking for. Then let's just go that way. But before I even wanted to do that, I was really, really considering trying to get into crop dusting. But that was just another set of dues that I would have had to pay to learn how to do all that. I couldn't do that.
Tell me a little bit about your process then. So you went from CFI, and then what was your next steps?
So CFI went to the regional, was there for about a year. I think it was like a year and 13 days. And then I jumped ship to a major carrier, and I've been here ever since. And I've been pretty happy about it so far.
The regional you went to, was there like a pipeline system to go to a major associated with it? Or was this a completely different major that you just applied for and got the nod?
The regional that I flew for did have a flow through program to their parent organization or their parent legacy.
Yeah.
And I was really considering doing that one. The reason why I was kind of hell-bent on getting out of the regionals was because the money was just not enough to pay off my student loans, pay my mortgage, all this other stuff that I needed to do as an adult. For those people that can budget properly, I give them kudos, because I'm not one of those guys. When it comes to money, I do my absolute best, but I'm juvenile at best. So I made the switch to this outside carrier, and my main reasoning for that was because at the time, year 2 first officer pay was the same as year 10 captain pay at the regional.
Okay.
So it was like I had this opportunity to make a significantly more amount of money in a short period of time, with also an improvement in quality of life. And I'm like, that's kind of a no-brainer for me.
Sure.
I could have stuck it out and waited for the flow program, but I know that there's a lot of politics involved in that, and I know those flow programs don't always go the way people hope or intend them to go.
So let's talk about your regional just a little bit more. How did the flow program work within the regional that you were in?
That's a good question. So there was a flow program. However, there were stipulations that you had to spend a minimum of 2 years as captain there.
With the regional before you get flow?
With the regional before you flow. That was a minimum. Now, we had people who were part of that program that were still on year 7 waiting to flow. So you must spend a minimum, not a maximum of time in that seat before they accept you. A good buddy of mine, he's in new hire training right now. Actually, he was supposed to flow when I left, so they held him back that long just because they needed him at the regionals as captain for that long. The legacy that regional is owned by is a great airline. I don't mean to disparage any company out there or anything like that. It just, as of right now, or as when I made that decision, it just wasn't the best choice for me.
So you talked a bit about the differences in lifestyles, where you got a better quality of life, in your opinion, with the major versus the regional. Can you talk more about that?
I spend a lot more time at home now at at the major carrier than I did when I was at the regional. The amount of time I spend at home is more. The amount of money I make is more, which always helps out. I mean, I'm not like rolling in dough. I don't want to pretend like I am, because I'm definitely not. But I get to see more of the world in certain cases. I don't travel like internationally across the pond or anything like that, but we do a lot of Central and South American routes that I get to see every once in a while.
Okay.
And just my time spent in the plane is more, I guess, efficiently paid, because I'm spending, in some cases, one day in the plane, I'm actually flying 5-6 hours a day for one leg, rather than getting paid for 4.5 hours, but doing 5 legs, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So it's a lot easier to have more time off when you meet that minimum of 72 hours or 75 hours a little bit earlier on in the month.
Okay. What do you think were the biggest challenges for you as you were switching between the fabrication work to aviation?
The biggest challenges, I'd say, were just learning an entirely new industry, being at step 0 or step 1 again, and kind of deleting all the preconceived notions you had and eliminating all the, here's what this person said on YouTube, so that's what I think it's always going to be.
Yeah.
So just if you can eliminate all that out of the back of your head and just take it for what it's worth at face value, right in front of your face. That was I think the biggest thing for me, because I had all these preconceived notions of what it was going to be like and what, I guess, learning the industry was going to be like, and I was completely wrong every step of the way.
Were there any of those preconceived notions that surprised you?
Yeah, I think the amount of continued study surprised me for the most part. I kind of thought, getting into this, you get your private instrument commercial, your multi-engine, then you're kind of done studying for the most part, and you kind of know what you need to know, and that was definitely wrong. I mean, every single time I take a flight, I learn something new, and every single hour you spend it in the plane, there's an opportunity to learn something different. So that was the biggest preconceived notion that I had that was blatantly false, was the fact that you never stop really kind of studying. Every year going back to a current, I'm always like sweating and tearing my hair out, because I'm like, oh my God, I don't know these limitations of this plane that I fly every day. Oh my God, what am I going to do? So you constantly have to restudy things that you definitely know, but then you got to kind of continue and compound on that knowledge and information just to make yourself a well-rounded and a better pilot and a better professional, because this is something that people count on you to be good at. So
it's a great answer. I love that. When you get into aviation, what did you feel were some skills from your previous employment that were transferable into aviation?
So I'm glad you asked that one. I was thinking really hard about that one, because when you emailed me that one, I was like, oh man, that's going to be a tough one, but I think I got that one. So the transferable skills from my last job that have benefited me in this job was the ability to think in 3D.
Oh, okay.
My spatial awareness was already relatively good, just because of the job I had as a die designer, just because you kind of had to think in 3D where, two things can't occupy the same space, otherwise bad things happen. So I got really good at trying to make bad things not happen in terms of that. So that's pretty much the biggest transferable skill. Other than that, physics, I think, is a good understanding of physics and aerodynamics kind of played a big role in, I guess, transferring from die design to aviation. So,
what do you find to be the most rewarding part of now being in a career in aviation?
I think it's pretty rewarding to be able to just kind of do this job. I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact that we're incredibly privileged to be able to do this job in general. Well, I guess, how many times have you heard that, oh yeah, I've always wanted to fly a plane, but I never thought I could, or insert reason here. Yeah. And I talk to people all the time that have had a dream of flying a plane, especially a big one like a jet, for their entire lives, and they're like 75, 80 years old. Like, oh, I've always wanted to do that. And I just think it's pretty incredible that we have an opportunity to do this for a living, and that we're able to do this and still complain about it. It's like it's not like, like it's not something miraculous that we're able to do on a daily basis. So, I just think that the sheer luck of being in this position is kind of gratifying in and of itself. But, from as much as I hate to admit it, from an egotistical perspective, I do feel a little nice when people go, "Oh, wow, you're a pilot. Wow, that's kind of cool." What route do you fly? And that's kind of a stupid thing to say, stupid thing to ask, but it's nice to be able to talk about the thing that you really care about, especially to the people that you may be trying to impress for work or trying to meet new people for whatever reason. It's a good icebreaker, and it's a good way to kind of meet new people and kind of maybe share the passion that I think a lot of us have.
What advice would you give to someone who's considering a change into a career in aviation?
If I had to give any advice, it'd be just make sure that it's something that you really want to do before you make that decision, both financially and time-wise. But if you're going to do it, go hard into it, go hardcore, and immerse yourself, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, and don't be afraid to learn something new, even if it's not going to directly help or impact your flying career. Just always be willing to learn something new. And if they're willing to make a complete change, then hopefully they're on the right path to doing just that. So,
well, Nick, I really appreciate you joining me on the Fly the Transition podcast and sharing a bit about your story as you change into a career in aviation.
Thank you very much for having me. It was fantastic. I had a really good time.
Well, that's a wrap for my conversation with Nick. A huge thank you to him once again for sharing his journey, as well as overcoming misinformation that can come with career change, communication, and the importance of keeping your partner in the mix as well. Some of the things I really liked about this, I've covered in my last solo episode about doing your research, communicating with your partner as you start working towards a career change, and just the importance of having them on board. He mentions that she's been with all along the way, and even through some unintentional miscommunication, he did work with her to make sure that they both knew what they were getting into. And the other thing I really liked is his conversation points about, even as a professional pilot, that every flight is still an opportunity to keep learning. I think most of us have probably heard from an examiner early on in our careers that this is a license to learn. And I think that's great that even though he is a pilot at a major airlines, he's still taking that attitude that every day is an opportunity to learn something new. So thank you, Nick, again for sharing all of that with us, and I hope that that is able to resonate with some of our listeners. I would love to keep this conversation going, and you can do just that by joining our growing Discord community. We discuss everything from training tips to career advice and a lot more, and there's also an element of the Flying Midwest podcast mixed in as well. So if you're interested in joining the Discord community, you can reach out to me at flythetransition@gmail.com, and I will send you a link to join the conversation. If you're enjoying what I'm doing, please consider liking and subscribing and leaving a rating or review wherever you're listening to this podcast. It really does help out in spreading the word about Fly the Transition. Before we go, don't forget to check out those affiliate links and grab some Flying Midwest merch. All those links will be down in the show notes for you. Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of Fly the Transition. And as always, keep your eyes on the skies and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.